You knew I wasn't the only one, didn't you? I said, my voice breaking as I stared straight into his eyes. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe like he used to when he was lying. For a second, I saw it. Everything he had spent so long burying behind perfect words, calm excuses, and carefully placed silences. Then, he looked away. Slowly, deliberately, like facing me any longer would make the truth impossible to contain. And in that silence, it wasn't just guilt I heard. It was confession. Everything he never said out loud, finally screaming without a sound. Chapter 1. I agreed to be the mistress. I never thought I would become the kind of woman who knowingly steps into someone else's relationship, not by accident, not through deception, but fully aware of what I was choosing. And even now, I can't decide what haunts me more, the fact that I did it or the fact that I didn't hesitate the way I should have when he first told me the truth. We met one evening outside a quiet cafe where the noise of the world felt far away, the kind of place where strangers sit too close yet pretend they're alone. And I remember noticing him watching me for a moment too long before he said anything, like he was deciding how much of himself he was willing to reveal without scaring me off. Then, he finally spoke in a calm voice that almost felt rehearsed. I need to be upfront with you. I'm not single. And I remember blinking at him, almost waiting for the punchline that never came. You're not? I asked. And he shook his head once, slow and certain. No, I have someone. And in any normal story, that would have been the end of it. The moment where everything stops, where you stand up, leave the table, and protect yourself before you get pulled into something messy and irreversible. But I didn't move. I just sat there staring at him while my mind tried to decide if I should feel offended, relieved, or curious, and all I could manage was, then why are you telling me this? And instead of shame or panic, he exhaled like he had been holding that truth in for too long, like honesty itself was something heavy he was finally setting down. And he said, because I don't want to lie to you. I can't do that. Pausing as if choosing each word carefully. It's complicated with her. We're not what we used to be, but I can't just erase it overnight. And I should have seen it for what it was right then, not honesty, but a carefully shaped excuse wrapped in softness. But instead, I listened like it meant something pure, like transparency automatically meant safety. And then he added quietly, almost like he was confessing something fragile. I'm not looking for a new life. I just don't want to feel alone either. And there was something in the way he said it that made silence feel like an answer instead of a warning. Because he didn't rush me, didn't pressure me, didn't even try to convince me, he just sat there waiting like whatever I chose would be entirely my responsibility. And I remember finally breaking the silence and saying, "You're asking me to be okay with this." And he looked at me without hesitation and replied softly, "I'm not asking you to be okay. I'm just telling you the truth." And that should have been the moment I stood up and walked away. That should have been the ending before anything even began, but instead, I took a breath I still regret remembering and said the one thing that changed everything. I know what this is. And in that moment, sitting across from him in a quiet cafe, I truly believed I did. Chapter 2. The arrangement that felt like control. At first, it was exactly what he promised. Controlled, limited, hidden, like a carefully drawn line we were both not supposed to cross. We met in places where no one would recognize him, where no one would ask questions that might unravel the version of his life he was trying to keep intact, and where nothing about us could ever accidentally become real in the eyes of the world. Late evenings that always ended too soon, quick lunches squeezed between his busy days, and stolen moments that felt like they belonged to a separate timeline, one that only existed when we were together and disappeared the moment he left. He never stayed long, never stayed over, never lingered when the light outside started to fade. He never posted anything, never took photos, never let even the smallest trace of us survive beyond the time we were sharing. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at him a little too long, wondering what it would feel like if none of this had to be hidden. If I could just walk beside him without calculating distance, timing, or consequences, without feeling like I was borrowing someone else's life for a few hours at a time. But then he would show up, sit across from me like nothing in the world outside mattered, and suddenly those thoughts would dissolve. "I don't have much time today," he would say quietly as he reached for my hand, like even that small gesture needed permission from a life I wasn't part of. "You never really do," I said once, trying to make it sound like a joke, though it didn't land that way even to me. He let out a soft, tired laugh. "I know. I wish it wasn't like this." That was always his escape line. I wish. As if wishing could soften the edges of reality. As if wanting something different was the same as changing it. "I wish I had more time," he said another night, his thumb slowly moving over my knuckles while the city outside kept going like we didn't exist inside it. I looked at him for a long moment and finally asked, almost too quietly, "Then why doesn't anything change?" For the first time, he didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped to our hands like the answer was hidden somewhere in the spaces between our fingers, something he could almost hold but never actually grasp. "I can't just leave everything," he said eventually, his voice lower now. "Not like that." "I'm not asking you to," I replied, even though I wasn't completely sure what I was asking for anymore, only that I didn't want to lose this version of him that made everything else feel quieter. And that was the strange part of it. The part I didn't fully admit to myself at the time. I did understand. Or at least I convinced myself I did, because understanding it made it easier to stay. That was the agreement I made without ever putting it into words, without ever calling it what it really was. He had a life I wasn't part of. And I had a version of him that only existed in stolen hours, fragile, temporary, and already slipping through my fingers even while I was holding it. Chapter 3. The First Cracks. The first cracks didn't feel like betrayal at all. They felt like confusion, small, harmless moments that didn't fully make sense, but still weren't enough to make me stop what I was doing. At least not yet. Back then, I kept telling myself that everything had an explanation I just didn't have access to, and that was enough to keep me from asking too many questions. He would disappear for hours without explanation, then return like nothing had happened. No apology, no detail, no story that connected the missing time to anything real. Just a simple, "Hey," as if the space between us hadn't stretched or shifted at all. His phone would also go silent at certain times of the day, almost like it followed a rhythm I wasn't allowed to see. And whenever I asked simple questions, where he was, who he was with, what he was doing, he would pause just a little too long before answering, like he was carefully selecting which version of the truth I was allowed to hear. I remember one moment clearly, sitting across from him while he casually checked his phone mid-conversation, then immediately locking the screen when he noticed my eyes on him. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly, slipping it back into his pocket like the question itself had made him uneasy. That should have meant something. It should have been enough to make me stop and think. But it didn't. Not then. Because I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for reassurance that everything still made sense in the version of him I had chosen to believe in. And most of the time, I got that reassurance. Until the night I didn't. I remember the question leaving my mouth before I even fully thought it through, like something inside me had finally grown tired of staying quiet. "Are you with her right now?" He didn't react the way I expected him to. No shock, no anger, no hesitation. He just looked at me for a second, calm, steady, almost detached, and said, "Yes." Just like that. No softness, no denial, no attempt to reshape it into something easier to swallow. Like I had asked him something ordinary, something insignificant. like it was the most normal answer in the world. For a moment, I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because my mind refused to process it properly. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice thinner than I expected. He gave a small shrug. "I'm not going to lie to you." And somehow, that should have been the moment everything became clear. But instead, it did the opposite. It made it harder to question him, harder to step away, harder to admit that honesty without limits can still be a form of control. And the worst part is, I didn't push back. I nodded. Because somewhere deep down, I had already accepted the role I thought I understood. Or at least, I told myself I had. But that night, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way I could fully explain. Just a small, quiet change. Like a part of me had finally started paying attention to what I had been ignoring all along, even though I wasn't ready to understand what it meant yet. Chapter 4. The Message That Changed Everything. It came late at night, unknown number. "How long have you been with him?" My heart dropped instantly. For a few seconds, I didn't even move. I just stared at the screen, the glow of the message lighting up my face while my mind tried to catch up with what I was seeing. Before I even confirmed who it was, I already had an answer forming in my head. It had to be her, his partner, the woman I had carefully tried not to think about too deeply for months, the one I had learned to place at the edge of my thoughts, but never fully erase. I hesitated before replying, my fingers unsteady as I typed, each letter feeling heavier than the last. "About 7 months. Why?" The response came almost immediately. 7 months? Then another message followed right after, faster this time, almost desperate, like she had been waiting for this confirmation longer than I could understand. "I've been with him for 2 years. I remember sitting there completely still, the phone glowing in my hand, the room around me suddenly too quiet and too distant, like everything had been pushed underwater. My eyes kept going over the words again and again, as if reading them enough times would change their meaning, but they stayed exactly the same, unmovable, undeniable. And in that moment, my first thought wasn't that I was one of many, it was that I was simply the new one. The recent one, the replacement, the mistake that came after her. My chest tightened as I kept reading the messages over and over, my thumb scrolling back up, even though I already knew what it said, as if repetition could somehow soften the impact. But it didn't. It only made it worse because every reread made it more real, not less. And even then, I still didn't understand what I was really looking at. I still didn't understand that this wasn't a comparison between two women. I still didn't understand that I wasn't stepping into something recent or accidental. I still didn't understand just how far back the truth actually went, or how many layers I had not even begun to uncover. Chapter 5. The Woman I Wasn't Prepared For. We met 2 days later. She chose the place, not me. A quiet cafe tucked away from the main street, the kind of place where people go to escape noise, not create it, and where no one expects their entire reality to collapse over a table. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting perfectly still, like she had been waiting long enough to move past shock, past anger, past confusion, and land somewhere colder, sharper, more final. She didn't stand up, she didn't smile, she didn't try to make this easier than it was. She just looked at me for a long moment and said, almost quietly, "You're the other one." I felt my stomach drop immediately as I shook my head, my voice catching before I could even steady it. "No, I think you got the wrong idea. There's been a mistake." She gave a small, tired laugh, not amused, not surprised, just drained, like she had already lived through this conversation in her head 100 times before I arrived. "I don't," she said it simply, like it was the most certain thing in the world. Then she slid her phone across the table toward me without another word. "Just look," she said. My hands hesitated for a moment before I picked it up, already feeling something in my chest tighten as soon as the screen lit up. Messages, photos, dates, call logs, pieces of a life I didn't recognize, yet somehow connected in a way that felt too intentional to be random. At first, I tried to make it make sense in a harmless way, like I was just missing context, like there was a simple explanation hiding somewhere in the gaps. But the more I scrolled, the more that illusion fell apart. The timing wasn't messy, it was precise. The disappearances weren't random, they repeated. The returns weren't coincidence, they followed a rhythm, like something planned, something managed. I looked up at her slowly, my voice quieter than I expected. "How many of us are there?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched me carefully, like she was measuring how far the truth could go before it broke me. "You really thought it was just me, didn't you?" she said. I couldn't respond, because I wasn't even sure what just me meant anymore. There's a pattern," she continued, her voice steady now, almost clinical. "He disappears, then comes back. Same excuses, same timing, same cycle over and over again." "But that doesn't make sense," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. She shook her head once. "It only doesn't make sense if you think you were the only one." And that sentence didn't leave the room. It stayed. It settled. It spread through everything I thought I understood until nothing felt stable anymore. Because slowly, something inside me began forming a shape I didn't want to recognize. This wasn't a triangle. This wasn't a mistake between two women fighting over one man. This was structured, repeated, controlled, like we weren't accidents in his life. We were parts of it. I set the phone down carefully, my hands no longer steady. "So, what are we?" I whispered. She held my gaze for a long moment before answering. "I think we're just pieces," she said quietly. "Pieces of something he built on purpose." And sitting there across from her in that quiet cafe that suddenly felt too small for the truth inside it, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't that there were more of us. It was that none of us were ever meant to exist in the same world, let alone find each other. Chapter 6. I was never special. That was the moment it hit me, not all at once, not like a shock, but slowly, like something heavy finally sinking to the bottom of my chest after floating there for too long pretending it didn't belong. I wasn't chosen. I wasn't unique. I wasn't even the other woman in the way I had once understood it. I was just one of them. One name in a list he kept somewhere in his life that I was never allowed to see. One stop in a routine that repeated itself with different faces, different voices, different nights. One version of a lie that changed shape depending on who he was standing in front of, but never changed meaning. And the worst part was realizing we all thought we were different. Every single one of us thought we were the exception. Every one of us believed he loved us in a way he didn't love the others. That there was something about us that made us more real to him, more important, more likely to be chosen in the end, when everything finally settled. We compared ourselves without even knowing we were being compared. We waited without knowing we were in line. We loved him in separate worlds, never realizing those worlds were stacked on top of each other, carefully separated so they would never collide. But none of us were the one. None of us were the priority. None of us were the future. We were just fragments of a life he had broken into pieces so no one would ever be able to see the full picture at once. And when I finally understood that, something inside me went completely still. I didn't feel like a mistress anymore. I didn't feel angry or special or even betrayed in the way I used to understand betrayal. I just felt removed, like I had been placed inside a story I never actually belonged in, only to find out I wasn't even the main character in my own experience. I felt like I had been erased from something I was never truly part of in the first place.